if you're somebody who's obese, has severe diabetes, who's struggling with a major mental health crisis, treat it as such. It is very serious. And you can't just have a little bit. You wouldn't tell an alcoholic to have a little bit. So as opposed to fueling with glucose, if we can fuel our brain with fats and ketones, then our brain is functioning. In America, we eat so much sugar, our blood sugar is spiking and crashing. It's spiking.
Hi everybody, welcome to my channel again. Today we have our wonderful Michelle Hurn. If you follow her on Instagram, it's Run, Meet, Repeat, right?
Run, eat, meat, repeat.
Run, eat, meet, repeat. Exactly. Awesome. So if you follow her on there, you know she's been very active in this community. A little bit about her. Michelle Hurn is a registered dietitian with 16 years of experience as a clinical acute care dietitian, lead dietitian in psychiatric care, and outpatient dietitian as well. Michelle is also an author. She's an author of 2 books. One is The Dietitian's Dilemma. The second one, which we have, and I meant to put it here so I could have it on display, is The Fox Family Food Fight. It's a really cute, adorable children's book to help them understand the importance of real nutrition. And both of those are available on Amazon. Michelle also co-authored the article Animal-Based Ketogenic Diet Puts Severe Anorexia Nervosa into Multi-Year Remission, a case series. That's incredible. What an accomplishment. That is also published in the Journal of Insulin Resistance. So Michelle currently serves on the board of the American Diabetes Society, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today too. And she's an ultra runner and advocates a low-carb, animal-based diet for metabolic health. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited. I know we've talked a little bit offline here and there, getting to know each other, and saw each other in person at COSI last year.
That was cool. That was good.
So that was kind of cool. Bumped into each other. But yeah, let's get to know you a little bit. Maybe we can start off hearing a little bit about your personal health journey and what led you to pursue a low-carb ketogenic lifestyle.
Yeah, briefly, my health journey began when I was 12 years old. I was diagnosed with anorexia. And, I was 5 feet tall, 57.5 pounds. So I was severely underweight, ended up in inpatient treatment for 2 months. And as soon as I went into inpatient treatment, I was immediately put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. And the ingredients for that, ingredients back then were, for tube feeding were corn syrup, maltodextrin, soy protein, canola oil. And, when you go into treatment, you're immediately put on the standard American diet. So it went from, several months of pretty severe starvation to a lot of sugars, flours, highly inflammatory foods. And I was told, even as a very young person, look, people with eating disorders just never really get better. Like if you do recover, and they define recovery as just getting weight restored, you're going to suffer with anxiety and depression and racing thoughts around food. Like I remember even as a 12-year-old thinking like, oh my God, like this is my future. Like I'm going to have to become just this high functioning person with an eating disorder. And while I was in treatment, I was put on 7 different medications because I was so anxious with severe GI issues and just started to have, racing thoughts around food, OCD, all kinds of things. And they weren't totally wrong. I did become weight restored. I, went through high school and into college and constantly suffered with bouts of anxiety and depression. I would say I relapsed, lost quite a bit of weight in high school. Kind of felt like I like to describe it as I was standing on the sidelines of my own life. Like my friends, my sisters, other people seemed to be able to participate and not be thinking, worrying, obsessing about calories and nutrition all the time. And I wanted to become a dietitian because I had this intuition that there was something I was missing. And, at the time as a young person, I thought like, maybe it has to do with like antioxidants. Maybe it has to do with these fruits and vegetables. What am I missing? There's something I'm missing that can help my brain. That was my hope. And, after I became a dietitian, so to become a dietitian, you get your 4-year degree, you have to apply and be accepted to an internship, and then you sit for the RD exam. Just so many things in the internship that I was in just didn't make sense. Like we'd go into the room as somebody with type 2 diabetes, and my preceptor would say, okay, hey, we're going to teach them how to eat carbohydrates throughout the day so we can match their insulin throughout the day. And I would just ask questions like, well, wait, if their blood sugar is high, should we teach them to eat less carbohydrates? And I was kind of pegged as this like difficult dietetic student. Like, no, everybody needs carbohydrates. And I don't think I can ever fully, I try to help people understand just as a dietetics professional, it is like hammered into your head from the time you're in college, internship, carbohydrates are the foundation of human nutrition. It doesn't matter if you're underweight, overweight, heart disease, epilepsy. There's no exception. Like, this is the foundation of human nutrition. And so questioning that was unacceptable, and of
Yeah.
course it would be like, oh, try eating no carbs for a day. You're going to feel terrible. And heart will, or fat will make your heart explode. But I'll never forget going into the room with somebody that had just been in a traumatic car accident. And I'm looking at the tube feeding formulas and I'm like, oh my God, look at this. It's the exact same formula I had as a 12-year-old. And at that time I was 24. So I'm
Okay.
like, 12 years later, we still have soy protein, canola oil. And then now I'm 40. What do we have? Soy protein, canola oil.
Insane.
People hit me up and they're like, Michelle, there's better. Yeah, they do have better tube feeding formulas developed now. Good luck getting that covered by insurance.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen once in the 16 years I've been practicing. So if not, like if you just said, I want this whole food based formula, I'm going to pay out of pocket, you're looking at over $1,000 a day. So, and I would just ask questions like, is that the best way to feed somebody who's been in a traumatic car accident? Like, is giving them this oils and this soy protein. But I was just told it doesn't, quality is irrelevant. We're looking for protein and calories. So it doesn't matter where you get that from. And that type of attitude is what really has, if you go into a hospital, they'll give you, patients are supplemented with Ensure or these very high sugar, high protein, basically desserts. And, but, I was new, I was a student. I was like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing. And as I became a dietitian, it was really hard because you see like the cycle of sickness. So we had patients, doctors would call frequent flyers. They would come in, with type 2 diabetes, maybe like an infection. You'd see them in a few months. Our heart is failing. Pretty soon we have to amputate a limb. And I was just told like, hey, look, it's the patients are not following the advice we're giving. It's not that the advice is incorrect. It's the adherence. It's the patients are lazy. The patients aren't eating all these whole grains that are so good for you. And, after a while, it really starts to weigh on you because you feel like, man, I'm doing everything that I'm taught. I'm trying to help people as much as possible, but my patients are not getting better. And there's exceptions. There's patients that I felt like were either really struggling or not potentially following a plan. But for the most part, it really seemed like people were doing their best to adhere, to this,
Yeah.
I'm trying to eat low fat. I'm trying to eat lots of whole grains and I'm just not getting better. I'm hungry all the time. And so, at that point too, I was an athlete. I was a runner. So I was training for marathons. And so I was eating a lot of carbohydrates. And so, I think there was also just this disconnect because I'm doing this and I'm okay and I'm fine.
Yeah.
And my patients are getting sick. Like, what's the problem here?
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense. Oh my gosh, there's so much there. So I'm gonna ask you a few questions on that, and then I want to dive back more into like when you actually found low carb ketogenic. But
Sure.
it sounds like I'm gonna sound a little facetious here, but it sounds like you actually were using your logic and almost like a Socratic method of let me ask questions to find the answers versus being spoon fed like this is problem X, this is what you do for problem X, this is problem Y. Like you actually ask questions to find, okay, so if we give this medication or we give this soy protein and canola, why? Or the diabetic person, why are we giving carbs? Like, I think that question is something that is really lacking in today's society for many topics, but particularly for health, of just asking why and understanding by the basic biology or the basic foundation of it all. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
100%. We are
Yeah.
no longer, well, here's the thing. We are no longer understanding the process, like you said, of why we are doing something. If
Yeah.
people have a question or they don't understand something, they'll Google it. Google says, do this. Okay, cool. I'm doing this. My doctor says, do this. Okay, cool. I'm doing this. Why? You need to tell me what we just, I'm so frustrated with dietitians and physicians that don't explain and then potentially explain options. Like, I believe in personal sovereignty. I believe people should choose and should have choices when it comes to their health. But I see over and over again that they're really educated on the consequences of doing
Mhm.
certain things. I saw it just standard practice. You're going to follow a consistent carb diet if you're type 2 diabetic. We're going to dose you with insulin. There you go. It was
That's it.
never explained, at least I never witnessed it being explained that, this is going to cause major health complications long term to the point where, you're probably going to die. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be dramatic. Or the
No.
statistics are there.
Yeah.
So it's very, I I hope that, young people and just people in general, if somebody tells you something, just make sure you understand why you're doing. That's me too. Like if you hear me say something,
I'm
anybody,
the same. Yeah.
understand why. And if you don't understand why,
Yeah.
ask. And if the person
Exactly.
can't explain it to you, that's a huge red flag.
100% agreed. Like anything with my clients, if I suggest a certain supplement or whatever, I always write that in their protocol what this supplement is for, how long it should be. Like that's another example with it's a little bit off tangent, but if I'm like, hey, berberine, for example, this is what it does. This is when you take it. This is how you know to stop taking it. I know there's a lot of practitioners out there that'll just say, just take this stuff or take this PPI, omeprazole. You have GERD, reflux. Just take, they don't give you the why or how long and all
What
those
could
kind of
possibly go wrong?
yeah, exactly. I mean, I was one of those that my doctor put me on PPI, never told me when to stop. And then lo and behold, in the future, I had low stomach acid. And I thought I needed more PPI. It was just, that was back when. But yeah, I think being, I don't want to say armed with education, but I guess that you could put it that way, being armed with education. You don't have to have a whole dietetics degree or anything. It's just the very basics, like you said, being educated on it. So, through that journey, how did you stumble across ketogenic or low carb, and how did you realize make the connection that this is the way humans should be eating?
Yeah, I'd heard about ketogenic or lower carbohydrate diets, but I had never really appreciated or valued them. We are the only thing I remember being taught is that it could potentially have some benefit for individuals with epilepsy. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was it. We weren't going to talk about it, teach it. And the clinic I was working in, I didn't see people with epilepsy. And so for me, I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials and the marathon. So this was 2019. And at that time, you had to run under 2 hours and 48 minutes. I believe they've dropped the standard to like 2:43. I could be wrong, could be lower than that
I have
now.
no idea. You know more
It's
than
very
I would.
fast. It's fast. And I had run a 2:54. So I was really training hard and I was, feeling pretty good. And then all of a sudden, I wasn't recovering well from my runs. Like I noticed I was getting tired and achy and it started to get a little dizzy. And so, initially you just think like, okay, I need to get my labs checked. Maybe my iron is low, but everything was fine. Like everything was normal. I started having worse anxiety. And so I reached out to a few of my friends. One was a sports dietitian. And I said, hey, this is what I'm doing. Can you help me? Is there something I'm doing wrong? And she said, oh, wow, you're not eating enough calories or carbohydrates. Really? I'm eating 400 grams of carbohydrates. That's not enough. Oh, you should be eating 500 grams, maybe more. And I'm not a very large human, and so I was like, okay, I guess, let's go, let's do this. And as you can
Yeah.
imagine, that didn't go particularly well. Like I literally was driving to work and I broke out in sweat. Like I
Oh,
couldn't see. I had to pull over. And so
wow.
what I understand now is just like a hypoglycemic episode. I was
Yeah.
having because when you eat that many carbohydrates too, right? You're crowding out protein, you're crowding out a lot of
Mm-hmm.
fat. I mean, I was probably barely getting in 50 grams of protein and you're really trying to minimize fat. And so things kept getting worse. I had to call out of work because I was having panic attacks. And I remember I was working at the hospital in Portland, Oregon, close to where I live. And we had just a really rough day. I floated, meaning I worked on different floors. So I was covering oncology and we had a very young patient pass away. And so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I came home early, fell asleep on the couch. It was like, 2 in the afternoon. And I woke up later and it was like 2 in the morning. Like I slept almost 12 hours. And
Wow.
I'm I wake up though, and it just felt like my body was on fire. Like my joints were aching, my legs hurt, and I had cut down on my running. I was eating all these carbs. I had tried, lots of conventional, weird, like you name it. I
Yeah.
thought like, and so I remember standing in the living room being like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Like doctors, dietitians, the internet, nobody's helping me. And so I went and got my car keys and drove to 7-Eleven and got 30 pounds of ice. And at 2 in the morning, I sat in an ice bath and just bawled my eyes out. And,
Oh
it's
my God.
funny if you had told me at that point, like, hey, this is going to be like a pivotal turning point in your life, I would have been like,
Yeah.
get out of here. So my wife came in at the time, obviously hearing me cry in the bathtub and was like, hey, you know what? I think we need to do something different. And I was done. I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done running. I'm done this is stupid. At the time I was 36. I said, like, I'm too old to be trying, this is a young person's game. There's 25, younger trying to do this. And I, after I fell back asleep that evening, I remember waking up the next day and being like, if I'm not going to run, why don't I cut my carbs? I intuitively knew they weren't making me feel well, which kind of makes me angry that I didn't trust myself. But I cannot fully express to you how ingrained it is in you that you have to have these. You will die without them. Your brain will stop working. Your
Yeah.
body will stop working. And so as I, said, okay, I'm going to follow a ketogenic diet. And then that's when I stumbled on the carnivore diet. And like many, I just laughed. I was like, that is the
Yeah.
dumbest thing I have heard. Like, that has to be, what is wrong with people? Why would they do that? But then, like we said at the very beginning of this, people ask why. Because what if I had just said that's dumb? But I noticed, going online and looking at people's profiles, I was like, these people look kind of healthy. I'm not
Yeah.
healthy. They're healthy. And so I reached out to several people in the carnivore community and said, shared just very briefly what was going on with me and said, tell me why, teach me. Like, I don't understand, but I want to. And I'm very fortunate. I had a few people reach back out and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is why it's worked really well. And it made sense. It made sense metabolically. And I was taking all these notes. And then, I working at the hospital, I had access to any clinical trial that I wanted. And I was like, I wonder if there's research on carnivore or meat-based diets. And at that time, I couldn't find any specific all carnivore, but the amount of ketogenic diet research literally made me angry because, once again, it was never presented to me except for epilepsy, and I'm just hundreds of studies on type 2 diabetes. I'm like this Eric Westman guy,
Yes.
like, just him. And then I learned names like
Yeah.
Beckman, and I was like, what is going on? I was fascinated. I was like,
Yeah.
I had patients that were diabetic for 30 years, and these people were getting people off 150 units of insulin in 8 days. I kept, like, my mind, I was excited, I was terrified, it was all the emotions, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
oh, it was so cool. And then I came home and was like, I'm gonna follow a carnivore diet. I'm gonna teach people about this. And of course, having a history of an eating disorder, that didn't go over particularly well with
I was
my.
going to ask you about that next. Is that like where you're still at, or where did you find your balance?
Yeah. So, telling Corinne is my wife, that, hey, I just said I'm gonna do it for 30 days. I couldn't tell exactly why. I was very dead set on carnivore, not keto, not whatever. I just said, look, I just feel like I need to do this. And she was like, no, this is a terrible idea. It'll set you back. She cried. I felt bad. But then
Oh,
she's like, whatever, you're going to quit. This is stupid. And it was rough for the first several days. Once again, when you go from eating 400 grams of carbohydrates to zero,
yeah.
and I didn't fully appreciate how important salt and potassium and all that stuff is.
All
So
good. Yep.
I think that would have made the transition. I had the worst headache of my life, like day 3, like even the traffic lights driving home. I just never forget that. So public service announcement: if you are transitioning to a low carb diet, make sure you take electrolytes. That'll make your life
Yes.
much better.
100%.
Yeah, but there's kind of the pivotal turning point of that whole thing was like 3 weeks into it. Corinne beat me home. She usually works later than I do, and she was sitting on the couch, and she was like, hey, can I talk to you? And if you've ever come home and your partner's sitting there and says, hey, can I talk to you? It's kind of like, oh no, like, either what
Yeah.
did I do, or who died, or.
Yeah.
And she was just like, I don't know if I like this way of eating yet, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And so we both
Wow.
were just like, whoa. And then, just like, this is kind of bringing it back full circle, is we both were like, why? Why? We have to figure out why.
Yeah.
Because if this is real, this will change everything. This will change my life, your life, people we work
A
with
lot of
lives.
people.
So that's that
Wow.
was that.
That was that. Wow. Okay. And so there was something I was going to say, and then it just slipped because, yeah, that's a big pivotal moment there. I mean, that's one of those diseases, symptoms that are silent that people don't see, meaning anxiety or eating disorders and things like that. So the fact something like this can help that, and it makes sense. Like, I'm sure you've heard Dr. Chris Palmer speak about this with, okay, if therapeutic ketosis can help epilepsy, and many anti-epileptic drugs are also used for mental health disorders, then shouldn't ketogenic or therapeutic ketosis help mental health. And I know, like, you said in your biography that you have worked with mental health as a dietitian. So have you, with the battle that goes on in the conventional medicine sphere, like, have you been able to implement this with any of those patients?
I mean, not in traditional healthcare,
Right.
that I worked in two different psychiatric facilities in traditional healthcare, and it's a mess. It's as bad as you think it is. The average
Wow.
amount of sugar fed to our psychiatric patients is about 42 teaspoons a day.
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
it's really,
I knew it
really
was
bad.
high, but that's a lot.
It's a lot. I mean, it is standard American times. It's really bad. And most of those patients are not able to advocate for themselves. So,
Hmm.
it's just a lot of sugary food and a lot of drugs. And you made a really good point. Chris was one of the first people that really helped me break it down to help me understand, like, okay, well, teach me why. And,
Yeah.
epilepsy, like you were saying, it's like babies are born with epilepsy. They didn't do
Hmm.
anything wrong. They didn't have a bad diet. You just have a metabolic abnormality in the brain where they do not use glucose well. And what
Right.
happens when we give them glucose? If you give, let's say, a baby with epilepsy with glucose-based formula, they're going to have a seizure. And so
Hmm.
what do? We make sure they have ketogenic formulas, or breast milk is ketogenic,
Hmm.
and then they don't seize. And so what the theory and hypothesis is for somebody that has a mental health disorder, major depression, anxiety, and people with eating disorders, there's a metabolic abnormality in the brain that is just not metabolizing glucose very well. And it's not your fault. Why it appears when you're 12 or you're 40, I don't know. Maybe we'll have information about that later in
Yeah.
life. But think about that. If your brain is literally not working, you're not getting the substrates to make your brain function, then you're going to have issues. For some people, it manifests as visual or audio hallucinations like schizophrenia or OCD, bipolar disorder. There's all kinds of things. For some people, it might be racing thoughts around food. It might be overeating or undereating. So, as opposed to fueling with glucose, if we can fuel our brain with fats and ketones, then our brain is functioning. Then it's not, then we're able to think clearly. Simply stabilizing, I mean, getting away from any of this, just stabilizing your blood glucose will make you a less anxious human. Everybody. In America, we eat so much sugar, our blood sugar is spiking and crashing and spiking.
Yeah.
But so just doing that, like if you don't understand any of the brain chemistry, but if you are able to utilize the substrate, it would, if you're putting gas in your car, but there was a hole, it just kept coming out. It wouldn't matter how much
Right.
gas you put in your car. It has to reach the
Engine.
fuel pump. It has to go where it needs to go. So when you're using ketones, if it can go where it needs to go, that's one of the hypotheses. Like I said, hypotheses of why these ways of eating work for many people with major mental health disorders.
What would you say, going off of that, what would you say? You've probably heard people mention, okay, ketosis is good temporarily. It can help people heal, lose weight, but it's not meant to be long term. I've heard somebody tell me a few years ago, I think it might have been a little longer than that, when I was at a conference and I mentioned, and I was still in the beginning stages of all this, and I said, okay, ketosis isn't good long term, but I'm doing it for my epilepsy. And so I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop. And they said, well, you're the exception. And I mentioned to them, but you said long term ketosis will ruin your hormones. So that means I have to choose between ketosis for my epilepsy or like get out of ketosis to support my hormones. And they didn't have anything to say back. So, like, what would be your viewpoint on that? Do you feel like ketosis is something someone can do long term, or just ketogenic diet or flexing in and out? Like, what's your thoughts around that whole
I mean,
controversy, I guess?
that's kind of human evolution, right? Like it's very funny for me when I hear things like meat is bad for you, fat is bad for you, like you said, ketosis is bad for you. It's like, well, if that was true, the human race would not exist. Like
Hmm.
that's how humans evolved. We literally evolved eating animal protein, fat, and fiber. Any type of foliage or vegetables and fruits that were available were so small and had such minimal sugar and carbohydrate content. I mean, we're talking in the tens of calories where a human being needs thousands, and that was only available in meat and fat, and so in organs, whatever we ate from the animal, the megafauna. And I think it's very interesting that people, yeah, would necessarily say like, well, this is bad for you long term. I don't think we have
Yeah.
any study. I mean, ketogenic diets are the most studied diet. Most people don't know this. And we're talking everything. We're talking vegan, vegetarian, restricted calorie, Mediterranean. Ketogenic diets show more consistently than any other diet out there. They are effective, meaning they work. They are sustainable, meaning people stay on them because they actually like the food and they like how they feel. And effective, sustainable was the last one. And I forgot. So basically, they work, and so that's kind of a silly thing to say. I mean, on the flip side, if someone said like you have to be in ketosis all the time, I could argue against that. I don't necessarily think that you have to be, but then if it works for you, I don't see any reason why you
Yeah.
would need to flex out of it per se.
And I wonder too, like the more I've been learning about this the past couple of years, the whole metabolic flexibility thing, which I think is a good thing to aim for overall. Like if you don't have to be therapeutic, like okay, flex in and out pretty easily. But the more I've been studying it, the more I wonder if the people who were on ketogenic and they claim it tanked their hormones, our society, our environment is not the same as our ancestors. We have so many other stressors. We live in a EMF inundated world. We have the pollutants, we have the hormones in the water, we have so many other hormone disruptors that maybe the body may have been stressed too much. And maybe that's why breaking out of it may have helped a little bit. But I don't, there's no way to know it was the actual ketosis's fault. Maybe that may have been the straw that broke the camel's back, depending on that person. But you see other people who have been ketogenic for many years and are fine. I mean, including myself. Now, I did a little experiment for a year, not a year, sorry, did an experiment for like 4 or 5 months, bringing in some carbs, but I was still very low carb. It was still like 50 grams ish.
Hmm.
But it didn't work for me. It didn't
Yeah.
mentally, all kinds of stuff. I didn't feel good. I gained about 15 pounds. And so I've gone back and this is how I feel. And I found the spot where I feel like we may have some of us just get so full on ketogenic or carnivore. Even for me, I can't stay strict carnivore. I can't eat enough on it. Like I don't get enough calories. And people say calories don't matter. I'm so tired of that. Yeah, like it does matter. You don't need to count it all the time, but it does matter. I feel like for a lot of people, they're just not getting enough calories and they're still in that mindset of I'm exercising, I need to exercise more and all that stuff. And they don't realize
Yeah.
they're in a calorie deficit.
I agree. I mean, there's a very heated hormone debate of whether, if can you be healthy if you're in ketosis all the time, especially if you're premenopausal. And we do know that, we need glucose to make estrogen. I mean, you could certainly say like, well, you can get
Yeah.
glucose from gluconeogenesis. And I know some people, but yeah, like you said, I know people who are using therapeutic ketogenic diets for various things, either a major cancer or another metabolic issue. I have a few people I work with anorexia that are in therapeutic ketosis. And so, I get very frustrated with people who say, well, you shouldn't do that. I'll give you an example. I had one woman I work with who, and she's given me permission to share this story. She hadn't gone for more than 48 hours without binging and purging for 17 years. And we got her into therapeutic ketosis. And she was so proud. She made it, and she's still going. But when she hit the 3 month mark, it was, I mean, amazing. And she was like, I don't want to, I mean, it was bad. It was suicidal, all this stuff. And she was like, I care about my health now that I've got to go to my doctor. Because she was having some pretty serious esophagus issues from, unfortunately, many years of purging. She's like, I got to get this taken care of. Got to get stuff looked at. I care about myself again. So she goes to her doctor and she's just happy. She's excited. Life is good. I want to get my labs run. And tells her doctor, I'm doing a ketogenic diet. It's amazing what this has done for my mental health. And her doctor, first thing he says is, well, that's bad for you. So you're telling me that
Ask why. Ask
almost
why.
2 decades of struggling with an eating disorder, that you're now a functioning, healthy human, and you're telling me that's what. So once again, I can't. I just
It
can't.
gets me so mad. I actually, similar, not the same exact, but on the same vein, one of my clients as well, 6 weeks into coaching with me, was pregnant, balanced her hormones, super excited. But she didn't realize how much her mental health was affected, not in the sense of anxiety stuff, but just, your basic cognitive function. Oh, I can think clearer and
Sure.
all those kind of things. And she told her OBGYN, who is supposed to be natural minded, that she's doing ketogenic. And her doctor scared the bejesus out of her, saying like, it's going to kill your baby.
Oh God.
And I'm like, how does this doctor not know the basic biology that babies, like you said earlier, babies are born in ketosis? Like
And breast milk is
breast milk,
ketogenic. Yeah.
even pregnant women, I did some research, even women, they don't have to be ketogenic, but in their third trimester are producing ketones for the
Amazing.
breast, like, so just the very basic biology of it for an OBGYN, I was like, golly, people. So, thank God for Lily Nichols and all the work she does. And
I love
yeah,
that lady.
so I hope to have her on at some point too. But looking at her research and sending my client all these, like you say, ask why. She is a perfect example where she asks, like, can you give me the science? And I'm like, yes, this wonderful dietitian has put on all the
Yeah.
science. Here you go. And so she can make her own informed decision, right? But it
Yeah.
really, it's, how long do you feel like it'll take, or what will it take for conventional medicine to reach a point where these wonderful strategies that are helping thousands and thousands of people to actually make it into mainstream medicine, if that can happen?
I don't know. I thought we would see a tipping point, right? We were going to see a point where people become so sick. The burden on society is so bad, because there's so many people that are metabolically unhealthy, and our tax dollars just can't afford to keep
Yeah.
this right going. But the more I think about it, I don't know. I don't know if it will happen in my or your lifetime, or maybe even our kiddos' lifetime, because
Yeah.
profit is so. There's two things you can do that I think really elicit change or prevent change. One is you financially incentivize somebody to not change or to keep a very flawed, corrupt system going. I mean, I like to share this statistic with people that it was 2022 is the most updated statistic I could find. Take a wild guess. How much do you think that the diabetes industry profited in 2022?
Oh, geez. If I had to guess, I would guess in the hundred millions.
$420 billion with a capital B. So if we think we're going to see any big change from large, and that's not like lost product, that's
Wait,
just pharmaceuticals and medical procedures, surgeries, physician salaries that are doing all these things. So that, I mean, it's one of the most profitable diseases behind cancer, as far from what the research was saying. So
so real quick, for somebody who doesn't understand what you just said, because I really want to dissect that. You
yeah,
said it was 400 and
$20 billion is
420
is
billion.
how much the diabetes industry is making right now. And
And
so
when
this
you say
is
diabetes industry, what do you mean by that? That's what I want to break down for some people that may not.
sure that is, and this is type 1 too. So I do want to disclaim
Okay,
that they didn't separate them, but type 1 is a very small portion compared to
right.
type 2. That is how much it costs, how much it's costing how much profit people are making off insulin, off metformin, off all these diabetic drugs, off surgeries. Type 2 diabetes is one of the highest complications, meaning that once you have that, you're going to have issues with your eyes. So they said, okay, I had to do an eye, this person has glaucoma or cataracts. Okay, they put that cost in there. Oh, I had to amputate their limb. That's a cost. Oh, now they're in kidney failure. That's a cost. So they just did a cost that
Mhm.
physicians had, because when you build something or you code something throughout a hospital system, you have to have an ICD-9 code, meaning you have to put why you're charging. And so if they had a
Right.
diabetes code next to it, that's what they used to kind of factor all this stuff together. So basically they were saying, how expensive is type 2 diabetes? How much, so they were able to take, what it was costing, what it was profiting, and say like, this is why this industry is not going anywhere. This is why, the pharmaceuticals are fighting against nutrition changes, because if people get better, we're not just kind of cutting into their profits, we're putting them out of business. So
Yeah.
no, I don't think we're going to see conventional medicine change. And I mean, I hope we can. And that's one of the things, obviously, the American Diabetes, the society I'm part of, wants to do,
Yeah.
is it's a three-prong approach. Like, we want to educate the individual, we want to educate the clinician, and then we want to affect policy. And all those things, though, are incredibly difficult, because, like you pointed out earlier with your client that was pregnant, one very powerful thing that people have is fear. A physician telling a type 2
Mhm.
diabetic, yeah, you need to eat those carbs and take the medication. Because what happens if you take insulin and you don't eat enough carbs? They basically force you, if you're on a consistent carbohydrate diet or you're taking insulin, you have to eat carbohydrates
Yeah.
or you'll go
Yeah.
hypoglycemic, and that's very
Right.
dangerous too. So, but they never explain to people like, well, where does my blood sugar go? Like
Yeah.
it's just a very sad and flawed system.
It that number, like I'm still stuck on that number. Like I knew it was big. I knew it was in the billions.
Billion.
And it's not any one person too. That would be different if it was like we could just say it's just pharma, like the head honcho of Pfizer or whatever. But because it goes in so many directions with doctors, with hospitals, with medications, and it's not just those three, but then those branch into others, and then there's like the dietetics, association, society. I don't know which one.
Yeah, the Academy of Nutrition is what they're called.
Okay. Yeah, and then all of them, and how where I love the videos that you used to make
Thank you.
with you and Kareen would
I like
just
to
crack me
come
up,
to them.
like talking about, just pretending you're this conventional dietitian and just here, have some sugar. That's no problem. You have a Snicker bars because of the money tied.
Heavily sponsored by processed foods. Like
Mm-hmm.
the fact, even when I was a higher carbohydrate, I was a high carbohydrate athlete and traditional dietitian. I would highly advocated against being sponsored by processed foods. Like I said, this is a conflict of interest. Like I refuse to be a member of the academy, and you don't have to be a member of the academy to be a dietitian. Thank goodness. Because when I graduated in 2009, Coca-Cola and Pepsi were the two top sponsors. I mean, now it's Abbott and, it's a bunch of other sugary General Mills. And then a few years ago, they released a press release saying that they were investing in these companies' stocks. And I was like, how is that not like,
Oh
you're the
my god.
Academy of Nutrition investing in Coca-Cola stocks? Like, how is that not a conflict of interest? And you made a good point about how it branches off. I mean, it was Nina Teicholz who first kind of showed me, and we talked about that every single member of Congress, every single one, is sponsored by at least one pharmaceutical, some several. So she even said we have a ketogenic member of Congress. But when those bills and things come up, like how do we change the food and how do we change the nutrition guidelines? I mean, they have a fiduciary responsibility to their sponsors, and anyone who says they don't is full of it. They
Yeah,
do,
yeah.
you
It's
know. So I mean, that's the problem
yeah.
with lobbying. That's why, in my opinion, we shouldn't do political lobbying. Well, what do I know? I'm just a dietitian.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, I feel like it's just going to continue to be like a grassroots movement for a long time, and I,
Totally.
I I feel bad for some people who, they because they rely so heavily on their insurance and what their insurance covers, and then they come to people like you or I where we can't take insurance. I don't know if you can anymore. Yeah, I didn't think so, but yeah, like I can't as a health coach. They're working on it, but I don't even know if I want to with the way it works.
It's
Um,
not good.
but
It is not good.
yeah, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound good. I'm like, I don't really want to deal with that. Anyways. But then it's like they can't afford like a private dietitian, private health coach, and then they're the ones that are stuck where they don't get the help they need, and it's like, golly, I wish there was, I don't want to make myself super cheap, and then I don't make the money to support my family, but I just feel bad. I wish there was more that could be done in those cases.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot working against people because even people that, and I love my patients. They're incredible. And, but as you know, even with information doesn't elicit change. One, you have to be really ready to be changed. Two, a lot of people are dealing with addiction. They're addicted to certain foods, or it's such a powerful coping mechanism that you're asking somebody who's used this for years and years and years to change habits. And that's really hard. And then your entire world
Yeah,
is just our modern food environment. There's sugar and processed foods everywhere, and there's some family members that are just worthless, in my opinion. I'm like, it blows my mind that if you have a person who's really sick and suffering, that you would still bring all these processed foods in the house. Some family members refuse to. I mean, not saying they need to participate necessarily, but just don't bring it in the house.
yeah,
So there's a lot working against people, but I've seen miraculous things when people decide like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to execute. We take it one meal at a time,
yeah,
every day, because that's all it is. It's not magical. Why I believe I'm successful as an athlete, as a dietitian, anything in life, is it's just time on task. One at
yeah,
a time. Don't get overwhelmed. Don't get too high or too low. Life is ebbs and flows. But can I just simply execute, what I need to know? But like you said, you need to know what to do. And
yeah.
traditional dietitians will tell you to eat all this sugar and starch when you really need to be eating protein and fat.
Yeah. I was actually, that's a good segue into the next thing I was going to ask. Like, what do you think on the topic of food addiction? And I hope this doesn't get, my last video was someone speaking about this topic. YouTube kind of flagged it for some things, but
Oh,
um,
Lord.
yeah, I know. I was like, oh, but we'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see where this one goes. But what do you think is the key to breaking free from food addiction? Like in this world full of processed, highly palatable foods. I mean, obviously the big thing is don't bring it in the house, but when there's complications such as your spouse is like, no, I want my fill in the blank junk food, or your children still are going to take time to, find those substitutes. What is the key for that one person that has that food addiction?
Yeah, and I do want to validate that food addiction is real and exists. It's amazing to me. I was taught as a dietitian it does not exist. It is not, it is a fake thing, it is a fake word, it is an excuse for people to be lazy, that moderation is the key. So just real quick, it's very real. I've
It's very
seen it
real.
many, many places, and it manifests differently for different people. So yeah, addiction in general is incredibly hard. I certainly don't have all the answers, but I do know that if you're truly addicted to something, you have to be abstinent and you
Hmm.
have to take it very seriously. People think about, like, if you had a child that had a drug addiction, it would be a non-negotiable. We're going to do anything and everything we can to support you, to make sure that you are not exposed to the substance, that we are putting you around good people. And often recovery centers are a different state. We got to get you out of this environment.
Hmm.
We've got to help you reset your brain, rewire your habits. But we know too that these processed foods really hijack your brain.
Hmm.
So it's twofold. It's completely eliminating these things that are hijacking your brain. It would be like, well, it's again like a drug addiction. We're going to eliminate those. But instead, with food, we're going to flood your system with these really highly bioavailable, nutrient dense foods that are going to help stabilize your blood sugar, help support your brain. Because, too, when you're trying to change behaviors, you need your brain to
Yeah.
participate in neuroplasticity, the
Hmm.
ability to change, to mold, to take in new information. And that can't be done if you're eating a lot of processed foods. So
Yeah. So getting rid of them in the first place. It's if people watching, if you haven't read the book, The Dorito Effect,
good one.
that it really dives into the aspect of how our foods, particularly the highly processed foods, are actually created to be addictive. And they actually put it straight into their slogans. Once you pop, you can't stop. Pringles. Like
That you
what's
can't
the
eat
other?
just
Yeah, I was just gonna say can't have just one.
yeah.
I forget what that one was, but they don't even hide it sometimes. They just put it right there. And it's meant for you to just keep going back so they can profit more. They don't care about your health. And so where could someone start if they're like, okay, I really want to change my way of eating. I want to improve my mental health. I want to improve any food addiction. What would you say is the most practical way for someone to start?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I always recommend before anybody takes any like actual action is take an inventory. I call it radical honesty.
Hmm.
Is, sit down, give yourself, 20, 30 minutes and just write out, be very, and this isn't like, I suck, I'm a loser. It's like, what is going on? Like for me, when I was in, that 3 a.m. bathtub, it's like,
Yeah.
I am so anxious that I can't sit still. I am short with my wife. My body feels like it's on fire. I can't go to work because I'm having panic attacks. Like, be very honest. Because sometimes when you want to go back to those things, you're like, it's not that bad. No, it's really that bad. Like, you need a
Yeah.
you need a reference point to start to say, why do I want to change? What? Because my life was a hot mess. And then like sitting down and realizing my life can look completely different in several months, but it takes a lot of commitment. And commitment is I don't want to say impossible, but I'm going to say unlikely to occur if you're doing it by yourself. And I'm not saying you need to spend a bunch of money on I'm
Yeah.
always happy to work with people, but and that can certainly just mean getting a community, having a good friend, having somebody that can help me be accountable, somebody I trust, whether there's so many good online resources and communities and even relatively inexpensive things you can do. But
Hmm.
it helps you be honest. It helps you check in when you're struggling. We learn, we share through our stories.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important. But then having a plan and consistently executing. And the plan too needs to be something you actually enjoy.
Yeah,
You know,
I was gonna say that.
I can't imagine, and that's one of the reasons I feel like I've been, low carbohydrate for since 2019,
Hmm.
and why? Because the food is amazing. I ate a ton of ground beef because I love
Hmm.
it. If you hate ground beef, you wouldn't it would be stupid for me to write you a meal plan and put a
Yeah,
ton of ground beef on there. I focus a lot on ruminant animals. I eat a ton of butter, MCT oil. I eat a little bit of carrots because I like carrots. I'm an athlete, so I have some carbohydrates. But
yeah,
if you figure out these are the things that I could eat and be really happy with, we can work with that.
yeah,
That will help you stay on track. You get to look forward to that. It's not anybody can follow a low fat, bland diet for a week, but you're going to be burnt out, right? We've
yeah,
all done these stupid, whatever. So
yeah.
something that I can do consistently. And when you just need time. Those first few weeks are tough. Change is tough. Your body's stressed. Even if it's a good stress, it's going to be tough. So getting support, being honest, setting yourself up, that to me is what's helped people be most successful.
Yeah, so it sounds like having that community, number one, having some support that you can reach out to when you're struggling that won't just tell you, oh, just have it this one time, you'll be fine.
Yeah,
Like, because the same mindset as an alcoholic, as a drug addict, anything like that, you have to abstain. And anybody that tells you otherwise knows nothing because these foods are created to keep you addicted,
yeah.
period.
I
End
would
of
say
story.
that too. It just like you have to treat it. You really have to treat it. If you want to be well, treat it like a true addiction. Like if you're somebody who's obese, has severe diabetes, who's struggling
Hmm.
with a major mental health crisis, like, you know, treat it as such. It is very
Yeah.
serious. And you can't just have a little bit, just like you said, like you wouldn't tell an alcoholic to have a little bit. I know for myself, somebody I'm lean. I run a ton of miles.
You do a lot of running.
But I know if I was to have something very dense in sugar, like I know what that does to my anxiety, and it's not pretty. It's like it was as recently. I mean, I guess this is getting further away, which is good. But as recently as 2017, I was suicidal. Like it
Mm,
was in a really bad place, and you would have never looked at me and been like, oh, she has a, I'm once again
no.
lean, look relative, whatever. But you have to take it seriously.
Hmm.
And I think when you give it that kind of like, wow, it's almost like, well, of course I wouldn't have a cookie. Like, why would I put my recovery? It's almost like it's okay to get a little angry. I mean,
Yeah.
don't yell at somebody, but just be
Yeah.
like, you set hard boundaries, just like you would with a kid you loved or a pet you loved or
Mhm.
whatever. Like, no, we're not doing that.
100%.
And people, you know what? I've had people be like, oh, if I go to this function, what are people going to think? Honestly, I found most people don't really care.
They
They really
don't.
don't.
They really
It's like
don't.
if you choose not to drink, most people don't care. And
In
if you
fact,
have one weird person that does, you can just be like,
yeah.
okay, well, thanks, grandma, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
There's been times where I've gone to like a gala or something like that, and sure enough, the food is not, I don't know what's in the sauce and stuff like that. I'll do the best I can, and people will ask like, "Oh, why aren't you eating that food?" I say, "Oh, I'm doing a ketogenic diet," but I always say ketogenic, and usually I don't say diet. I'll just say I'm doing ketogenic or something because just the mentality of the word, like if I say I'm keto, they think it's like a fad thing.
yeah,
But
yeah,
there's something about changing it to ketogenic. They go, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "Have you heard of keto?" Yeah. Oh, well, that's where keto came from, and then it sparks this conversation where you're at this table with people and you can like evangelize,
yeah.
what
No,
they're eating
which
to
is really
others because
cool. What a
yeah,
gift.
because the heck, who knows? They might be suffering with something that it can help with. And I know I saw Kelly Hogan's stories recently that she was on a plane. She drove or she flew to the West Coast, and the person on the plane next to her, they talked about carnivore the whole time. And the person by the end of the flight was like, I need to do this. Like, so going back to where we said, like, how do we get people to change? Like, is it going to be the conventional medicine or whatever? Like, I think this is it, like telling our testimony and how we do it, right? Like, it's when we share those things and people are like, wow, okay, like you've been doing this for 7 years, for 6 years, for whatever. It's like, you don't miss this? No, I don't, because my taste buds have changed and, I'm not addicted anymore. And I learn my boundaries. I tell my clients, we don't just set goals, we set standards. And I mean, it sounds like that's what you're saying too, is
Yeah, I
just,
love that. It's
you
setting
know,
standards because it's funny. We think sometimes in life it's like, oh, I just want to be. It's funny when people say, I just want to be happy. It's like, what does that mean? Or you don't want to
yeah.
live a life where you're always just on vacation. Like we know people get joy out of doing hard things, right? The
Hmm.
process of, and I've seen this with kids and people I work with. There's so much joy in and accomplishing something. And I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I love running. It's like you put in all the work to, as great as racing is, it's just the journey that makes things
Yeah,
really amazing. And I think that's what we're missing to some degrees as a society is this is our standard. I don't see this in as many families anymore. It is our standard. It is okay to say like, yeah, as a family, we work really hard. We eat protein. We are a protein focused family. We don't drink soda. It's like setting some standards. Like this is my non-negotiable standard that will make your life so much better. It's not
totally.
society wants you to just be this like, yeah, do whatever you want, eat candy, eat cookies, fun. It's like, that's not fun. That's disease.
Right.
The goal of that is to make you sick, fat, and depressed because that's how we make money off you. So you have to rise above. And I love what you said, though, about sharing your testimony and sharing your story because yeah, i genuinely I genuinely believe that sometimes I get so excited I don't want to talk about it all the time, and you don't want to like beat people over the head. But if someone
Yeah.
asks me like, oh wow, that's a lot of meat, are you eating any vegetables? Like, no, I'm just eating meat. Like, why? And I think having one or two talking points, I don't I don't usually talk about my running because it's kind of unrelatable, but it's like, I used to have severe anxiety, and it's amazing how much better my anxiety is. Like, I mean, that's 99% of the population, or energy, right? And so you can share like just a few basic things about human metabolism. Like, oh yeah, when you eat protein, blood sugar stable, you feel much better. Isn't that crazy? Wow. You get the wheels turning because people
Yeah.
want to be better. Most people know
Like,
they're not feeling great, So
yeah. No, I love that. That's 100%. Like it's the one of the things you said earlier about how when you were working in conventional the hospitals and stuff that they seem to always be blaming the patients like it's their fault. It's like, oh, you're still eating junk, or you're not moving enough, you need to eat less, whatever it is, they eat less, move more. But it seems like it's always going on them. And I've had clients in the past that really scarred them, and
Mhm.
it took time for them to realize like it's not necessarily your fault. Like you said, there's some people, this is just the genetic aspect, like you can't process glucose well and all that. And it's just like, maybe try this, like try ketogenic, try carnivore, try low carb, anywhere on that spectrum, and see where it fits for you. But yeah, it takes time to heal on that. So closing up in the last like 10 minutes, I want to dive into a few like kind of random things. What's your daily routine look like in terms of like food choices, exercise? I know you run and you've gone like keto, carnivore back, and maybe some mindfulness things. Like what does a day in Michelle Hurn's life look like?
Oh, wow. So I'm usually up relatively early. I guess all things relative. So I'm up about 6 a.m.
Mhm.
Usually first thing is I'm a coffee person. Coffee, coconut oil, MCT, sports fan. So usually check in sports. But about half an hour to kind of chill out, stretch a little bit, take Jackson for a walk. Jackson's my German Shepherd. And, running, it can depend, depending on the day. I mean, anywhere between longest run of this training cycle was a little over 30 miles at a time. So between 8 and 30 miles. I usually try to get that done in the morning. I find when I run in the morning, I'm just a better, happier human. And so after that, usually a quick shower, depending on, I do personal consults. So that can
Mhm.
just vary widely depending on if I'm seeing someone in Australia or the UK. It's kind of like where
Yeah.
we can schedule. And so, I eat 2 to 3 meals, three most of the time. But if I have a really long run, I mean, I might not be home till like 1. It's like, well, I guess we're having 2 meals. But all my meals are meat based, anywhere between 6, 8. I mean, dinner is usually more 10 plus ounces of meat. I do long fermented sourdough for my carbs, and usually some carrots, sometimes a little bit of fruit,
Yeah.
but quite a bit of butter and ghee, I would say, would make most of my fats. And of course, some whatever fat is in the meat. But yeah, it's not super exciting, but I mean, I love it. It's, run. And that's why I say I run, eat meat. I'm going to do it again the next day.
The same.
Yeah, I have just a bit, depending on the day, between 4 or 5 consults, checking email, and then um, possibly meet Korean at the gym. I try to go to the gym a couple times a week, and I appreciate you mentioning mindfulness. Every day I do some short meditation. I just find my mind, it's great. I appreciate my mind's working, running, doing all these things, but I find it's very important to get it to stop.
Yeah.
Take a minute, breathe, let it wind down. And I'm usually in bed pretty early when I'm training. It's rare that I see past 9:30. So,
I love that it's like our generation, like when we were younger, it's like midnight, 1 o'clock in the
yeah.
morning, maybe. And now it's like someone invites me out to something at maybe 7:30 or 8, and I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, we got a new group of friends, and I already let them know. I'm like, "Hey," they're like, "Well, you'll be done by 8." I'm like, "Okay."
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Be
That's
done by
good.
then,
Yeah.
can't
No,
start at
exactly.
8.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love when I find friends that are like on the same time
Yes.
as me, or
Well,
like
sleep,
if we're gonna go hang out.
as an adult, I don't sleep in very well too.
No,
So
I
it's
don't
like if I
either.
stay out late, it's not like, oh, you stay out till midnight, you're gonna sleep till 8. It's like, nope, you're gonna be up at
No.
6. So I just have to be very careful, especially when
Yeah.
my training is really high, just because of
Mhm.
recovery. I mean, that's one of the few ways your muscles recover, right? Your nutrition,
Yeah.
your sleep. So I got a race coming up, and then I'm gonna take some time off. So maybe I'll stay out till 10
That's
during
a
that period. We'll see.
rebel.
Watch out.
No, but I love that you prioritize that, because one of the things too with ketogenic, or just food in general, when people hear that I have done it for my epilepsy, they're like, "Oh, well, that's different." Like, of course you're going to stick to it. I understand. So back to like the social aspect, where people maybe they're doing it for something not as medical grade, like maybe it's weight loss or inflammation. Diabetes, I feel like, is just as important. But in their mind, it doesn't hit the same spot, having a seizure versus having blood sugar control. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So like I try to tell them, well, it's in your mind. It's that mindset thing. So the mindfulness, like thinking and letting your mind rest for a minute. But going to that point of like, how important is this for you? For me, I don't want to have another seizure. I don't want to go back on the medications that cause me to have panic attacks, anxiety attacks. And this, I 100% relate to the suicidal aspect. Like, I don't
Yeah.
talk about that part very much, but the medications were doing that to me when I was a teenager, in my up until my 20s. And so like I don't want to go back to that. And if ketogenic means like I have freedom for that, like sure, I'll have a steak and ground beef and eggs and fish.
Never. It's what's been
Wow,
given
like
back to me. I know when people call it restrictive or this, I'm just like, you haven't been. I think to myself, you clearly haven't been to a place that you couldn't go back, and that because
right.
that's what keeps me motivated. Like I can't go back. I know what it's like to
Hmm.
want to take your own life. I know what it's
Yeah.
like to literally be starving to death. I know. I remember, and as have healed and remove, get further away from that, I'm grateful that it's not as like acute and
Yeah.
scary, but it's I've been there. We don't want to go back there. So yeah,
Well,
and for
we
me,
wouldn't tell,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, we wouldn't tell somebody with a peanut allergy like, oh, it's fine. Like it's just a peanut allergy. Like we know it's life threatening for them in that aspect of an anaphylactic shock. But it's the same thing with somebody with anorexia or somebody with epilepsy or type 2 diabetes. You're going to have a negative reaction to it. And it can become life threatening long term, just in a different way.
Yeah, we're such a quick fix society. Like I've often said, like to like if a parent saw their young toddler toddling over and about to drink some bleach, I mean, you would do Usain Bolt, sprint, do whatever you need, run through a train to knock that out of their hand.
Yeah.
But if your kid's drinking soda, it's like, even if it'll cause maybe even worse complications, but it'll take 2 decades. It's really embracing just this.
Yeah.
It's hard as humans because we are wired to react more immediately, but you really have to take that like long-term approach, knowing that everything I'm doing, that's why I mean that's the way to do anything in life to be successful is time on task. You want to get
Mhm.
out of addiction, focus on the things that can get you out of there. You want to be great in
Yeah.
business, you want to be great at whatever, you time on task over and over and over again.
100%. Tell me a little bit about the protein project. What is that
Oh
about?
yeah, thanks for asking about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I truly believe that processed food companies target low income individuals, people struggling, socioeconomically, and as food costs. I mean, I feel like it's like everything costs have risen. We where I live, I went and I visited like several food pantries, and I was asking, do you how much protein do you guys have? How much meat? And a woman was telling me like we almost none. They get a little bit of eggs in. They have like canned chicken and tuna, but it's very rare to get like beef or anything like that. They just don't get it because it's expensive. And
Right.
restaurants and things that donate, that they're not giving that away. And so
Yeah.
what I wanted to do is I partnered with rancher that I know. They do all regenerative farming, and they do similar to kind of the imperfect produce, to where they'll give me cuts. They'll vacuum pack them that they might not be able to sell, but they'll sell them to me at a really discounted rate. and I give that
Mm.
directly to the food bank. So that just goes directly to my community. And so, yeah, I just started, a charity where people can donate, and everything we raise. And even for the books, the Fox Family Food Fight, like half of that just immediately goes into to buy ground beef. And I'm able to get it either ground beef or cuts, we're if a really discounted rate, we're like $3 or less a pound. And that's pretty unheard of for regenerative meat. So
Yeah. And so they're getting not just like any meat, but they're getting good
it
quality.
legit, yeah, it's
They're
it's
getting good
really good
stuff.
stuff.
Like
And
that
I
stuff like
asked too.
10 pound, like $7, $8 a pound normally, something like that.
Oh yeah, it can be really expensive. And
For just the ground beef, but like the steaks obviously way more.
oh yeah, and when we get that, I usually try to do $300 or $400 at a time, and depending on what that can be, if let's say 75 pounds. I asked, it's like, how long does this last? And she's like, we have to portion. She's like, I put it all out like in a freezer because they have a big, not every food bank. That's another thing I should say. Like, not every food bank has fridges and freezers. She's like, it
Right.
was gone in a day. And we had to limit people to one. I mean, they
Yeah.
said the need is skyrocketed. And I would imagine, I mean, this is in my community, but I'm sure it's everywhere that there's a more need and less resources, right? So people need this. People want this. It's hard to get.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, this has really helped my health so much. It just feels kind of like a small thing I can do to give back.
Do you ever plan on making that grow like to outside of your community?
Ugh, I don't know. I mean, if I could, I would love to. I really wanted it to be a 501(c)(3), and that was
Mhm.
unfortunately, the financials of that was beyond my capability. Since I left the hospital setting, like my amount of money I make is pretty low. you know, it's not, it's a tough gig. So, if I was ever able to, have the time or financial resources, I definitely would do that.
That'd make your. I mean, I think about it here in Phoenix. We have a huge homeless population, like
Yeah.
through the roof, and a lot of people living in poverty. Just, I mean, I see it all the time, and something like that would be incredible to have. We have a lot of food, a lot of St. Mary's Food Bank, St. Vincent de Paul, like all those typical things all over the place. But I don't think I've ever seen something that focuses on the actual nutrient dense, food like that. And
Yeah.
that would be incredible to start branching somehow. I have no idea how to start something like that or where to go with it, but that would be cool.
Yeah, that's been my kind of sad, I don't know if sadness is the right word, but struggle with things like Meals on Wheels, because I know how important that is for so many people, but it's the food pyramid. It's like I'm giving someone with type 2 diabetes lots of carbs. It's like,
Yeah.
what if we actually gave people, I volunteered at a soup kitchen a couple weeks ago, and they were making lasagna for the homeless population, which is, once again, it's just pasta. It's like these people desperately need less flour, less sugar, and some nutrients.
Yeah.
And of course, unfortunately, a lot of those places, it's donation based, so they're, and I mean, I admire the altruism and people wanting to help, but I'm like,
Mhm.
I think this is just kicking the can down the road versus can we actually help people heal?
Yeah. No, 100%. I hope there's easier solution for situations like that coming soon. And I think what you're doing is definitely a first step in that direction. And maybe somebody that hears the story of what you're doing and knows the business model and stuff that can help kind of push this forward a bit more would, you never know. Starting something like that small, it can snowball into something incredible. So, which you are affecting lives close to you, and you never know what's going to happen with those lives. So that's really admirable. Tell people about like how if they wanted to work with you, how can they do that? About your books
Yeah.
and all that kind of close up
Thank
stuff where they
you.
can find you. I know you're
Yeah.
off Instagram for a little bit, but
Let me put myself out. I appreciate that. Real quick. So my two books, The Dietitian's Dilemma. So I wrote this. It was, I mean, the kind of subtitle is "What would you do if your health was restored by doing the opposite?" So it's a little bit about my story, like going through anorexia. That's one chapter, and then I wanted to write chapters on things I thought we really had good evidence that low carb was effective. And so that's mental health disorders, including major depression, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, which is very, people think, oh, fat. So it's a lot of good information about heart disease, eating disorders, including anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, and then sarcopenia, which is just muscle wasting. And then I have a entire chapter on plants versus animals, because there's a movement right now that tells us we need to be plant-based. That is totally nonsense.
no.
And then a chapter on getting started and like, okay, what do I do now? And then I wrap it up. People were curious about running. So if you want to learn about, what I do, low carbohydrate, how to oxidize more fat for fuel, even at faster paces. So
Mm.
that's, I think that can be really beneficial for a lot of endurance athletes, or even if you're someone who just
Yeah.
wants to try to lose some weight and is doing some endurance exercise. Then the Fox Family Food Fight is just fun. A lot of alliteration, Freddie Fox, and, he's got, he gets type 2 fox diabetes, and the foxetician at the hospital is not particularly helpful. And so just about kind of his journey to find
Yeah.
out, like, okay, how did this happen? Foolery is the kind of represents the like pharmaceutical companies, this fox that convinces all the Fox family to leave their traditional diet and eat these unhealthy foods. So it was
I
fun.
love that one.
I really loved writing it. I was so fortunate to find an incredible illustrator that I
Yeah.
enjoyed. That was cool.
It's done well. Yeah,
Who
we've
knew?
read it a couple times. I might ask Isaac again, like we'll read it tonight again in
Thank you.
honor
I
of
appreciate it. Really enjoyed doing that. And then, yeah, if you want to work with me, I do just one-time consults. Some people are like, hey, I just need a meal plan. I've already got a community. I do work with people on an ongoing basis. If you want to work with me, either biweekly or weekly, I have a few spots for that. And all of that, my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net, easy to contact me. We can set something up via Zoom. I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on. This has been awesome. I'm glad we get to talk about those. I know we didn't get to talk about, I guess I didn't get to talk about the Diabetes Society. You want to say something real quick about that?
Yeah, I could just throw out. So the American
Yeah.
Diabetes Society, the goal of that was to kind of be like the opposite of the American Diabetic Association, because
Yeah.
that is profit based, pharmaceutical funded. You'll get on there and they'll have recipes full of sugar. So we were like, we have to teach people that they deserve a normal A1C. This whole like, oh, A1C is 7, that's fine. No, we can actually help you get your
Yeah.
A1C to a normal level with nutrition, because the American Diabetic Association says, "Oh, we don't believe in any diet." They're literally on their website, they're ambiguous. We say you need a low carb diet. Carbs increase glucose, get rid of the carb. So it's a kind of a three-pronged approach. It's going to be teaching people about lifestyle change. Lifestyle change is reducing or eliminating carbohydrates, focusing on animal proteins and fats, and fiber. Some people,
Yeah.
do non-starchy vegetables,
Yeah.
and then doing some lifestyle modification. Are you able to do it's for most people, it's very low intensity exercise before moving into more. And then the second prong is going to be talking to physicians and starting to get buy-in, starting to actually teach physicians, because most physicians don't really understand human nutrition. They're
Right.
just taught kind of the basic food pyramid. And from there, it's also policy change. They have not only locally, or I guess you could say within the U.S., but also expanding into other countries. Asia, into Africa, South Africa, because a lot of people, we have a doctor in the UK that's on the board saying like, hey, a lot of people can't afford medications. So truly teaching
Yeah.
people and helping physicians understand that we can get these things under control without medication is going to be a really powerful thing to do.
Wow, that sounds amazing. So it's yourself, and then who's spearheading it, and who's involved with this?
Gosh, I hope I don't miss anybody. So Ken Berry, Dr. Ken Berry, Eric Westman, Dr. Tony Hampton, Dr. David, I apologize, I don't remember his last name. He's our UK doctor. And
Not David Beckham, is it? I
gosh,
don't
I
remember
feel like
him.
there's one more major. Bickman, Dr. Ben Bickman
Okay,
is
wonderful.
kind of the doctors. And then for dietitians, it's myself, it's Temple Stewart, RD named Shannon Davis, and Shauna Husson are
Oh,
the
wonderful.
are the dietitians doing this. So we're going to be doing recipes. Obviously, we're going to be, doing educational materials. We've already written articles, and the goal also easy to understand, very
Yes.
simple. I think sometimes people get overwhelmed with too much information, you know, 2-minute articles. Like, let's get you going.
Yeah. Keep it simple. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing with that. And then if people, we'll put all the links below in the description. So if you want to work with Michelle or buy her books, again, thanks so much for coming and spending a little extra time. And we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. See ya.